Welcome back to the Atheist Interviews. I am Mr. Atheist, but for the remainder of this, you'll probably just hear me called Jimmy. Before we get started, a quick announcement. The Patreon for this page has officially launched, and everything you sign up for, all of those goodies, all of those donations will go to the Atheist Community of Austin, which is a nonprofit that absolutely deserves your patronage. Additionally, you can actually sign up to become a member of the Atheist Community of Austin. Links to both of those are in the description below. Now, today I have for you a guy that I'm sure you have never heard of or seen before. He's a past president of the Atheist Community of Austin and now sits on the board for American Atheist. He is an advocate for skepticism, often a host on the Atheist Experience, and a champion of counter-apologetics. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Dillahunty.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
No, thank you. I'm very excited. And we start off each of these things with what we call the flash interview. The flash interview is 10 rapid fire questions in a row. Keep your answers to about a sentence. We will come back to any of them that seem like they're interesting, but otherwise it helps the audience get a baseline of who you are and a little bit of your history. So if you're ready, we will start that now.
All right, I'll give it a try. You are boxing me in more than anybody ever has, so good for you.
Oh man, after these 10 questions, you won't feel boxed in, I assure you. But I think this helps. So, what part of the country do you live in now?
Austin, Texas.
What is your exact address? No, I'm kidding. What part of the country were you raised in?
Originally Missouri, born Kansas City, high school, St. Louis, and then I ended up in Virginia while I was in the Navy.
Very cool. So were you born into a religious home? And if so, what was the religion that was practiced?
Yes, primarily Southern Baptist. There were some Catholics on one side of the family, but some of them converted to Baptist as well.
Okay. How big of a family do you come from?
I have one brother and a handful of cousins. My parents each have 3 siblings, so there were some good-sized family gatherings.
Okay. In regards to being devout or taking it seriously, how serious does your immediate family take the religion, or did they take the religion?
Very.
Okay.
While I was growing up and now still, there are a couple exceptions. You know, some family members are less religious than others, but certainly my parents are as devout and fundamentalist as they've always been.
Just like mine. Were you the first member of your immediate family to leave the religion?
Yes.
When you left your religion, did you transition through other religions or straight to atheism?
I didn't go through any other organized religions. I went in the short span. It was a long period of study, but in a short span, I rapidly went from, hey, I can't be a Christian, to I'm not quite sure what I am, to, oh, I'm an atheist.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I'm going to come back to that one. So you can answer the next one in one of 2 ways or both ways if you want. Some people like to not let people do the math on their age. So how old were you, or how long ago was it that you became an atheist?
Oh, wow. It was around... I'm 49, so it was around 30 or so when I actually said I'm an atheist. There was a period of about 1.5 years prior to that where I was in flux.
Okay. Number 9, who is your favorite atheist author? Who is your favorite atheist author, communicator, or educator?
Me.
All right. Who else?
Now you can't edit that part out so that that's all I say.
Yeah. No, I won't. At least we don't have that in common. No, I'm kidding.
I have a lot, probably far too many to pick.
Sure.
Some of the best influences, David Hume and Voltaire and Colonel Ingersoll and all that. I answer me as kind of a half joke because there are people who I think are better at this in different ways and people I admire, but nobody's going to represent my views better than I do right now. So that's kind of the standard joke, is that I'm my favorite. But in truth, if you were to ask me, who's your favorite person on the Atheist Experience, it's not me. It's Tracy, which I've said over and over again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned Hume pretty soon off the bat. He's usually my second. I usually go with Hitchens because I'm unoriginal. So, if you could have dinner, this is the final question, and so you can take a little longer with this if you like, but if you could have dinner with any individual, present or in history, who would it be?
Wow. And I only get to pick one?
Yeah, just the one.
I'd go with Jesus.
My goodness. Yeah, you've said you don't take the mythicist position, and I don't either, but every year I feel like I get a little closer.
Well, so, I feel like if he doesn't show up, now I'm a mythicist.
Yeah.
And if he does show up, maybe he can, explain some stuff that might be useful to all the people who are still believers.
I suspect if he did show up, he'd be as confused about the claims made in his name as you are.
And you know, if he can only communicate in, you know, Aramaic or Greek or something like that, you know, and can't speak English, well, that tells me a lot already. You know, if we're not able to communicate, he ain't God.
He did visit the American continent, according to the Mormons, and would know Reformed Egyptian. I don't know if that's one of your languages.
No. That one was made up before I was born, and it's not something that I ever actually studied.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know that anyone ever did study it, but I don't know if you know this about me. I grew up as a Mormon, so the Mormon jokes, they just can't help but come out. So,
I saw the Book of Mormon for the first time a month and a half ago on Broadway at the Original Theater. I had been waiting, and I finally went and saw it. And I loved it and became a junkie. I had to download the soundtrack. I've listened to the soundtrack like every day for a couple weeks, and then I worked parts of the soundtrack into my magic show for fun. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I love the Book of Mormon.
That is awesome. Oh, I am going to isolate that clip for fun. Take that out of context. All right, so that is the end of the Flash interview.
I kind of feel like I'm on Hollywood Squares right now.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I can see the camera thing, so there's just this green screen behind me, and it's like, you know, could I do a Paul Lynde imitation? Could I, you know, true or false? You know.
Now, Matt, you and I have a shared love for magic, and I actually started learning as a teenager after I saw a magician at church, believe it or not. Learning sleight of hand and learning to manipulate a crowd and talk to people and lead them places, that actually led me to learn and develop my skeptical faculties, I'll call them. And I'm curious if you had any sort of similar experience with magic, or if maybe since then it's made other things about the way people are religious make more sense.
It certainly has in recent years. I mean, there's a home movie of me getting like my first magic kit when I was 3, but I didn't really get serious till I was maybe 10 or 11. And I've been doing it my whole life and studying it. It's kind of a secondary or maybe co-equal obsession to, you know, philosophy and religion and other things. It's one of the reasons why I put together the Magic and Skepticism tour, because I had done a lecture that primarily relied on close-up and parlor magic to use that to teach skepticism. But I had a number of really weird encounters. I mean, when I was in the Navy, I would do tricks for people, and they would, on more than one occasion, somebody was like, oh my gosh, how do you handle all that demonic energy? And I was like, I'm still a fundamentalist Christian at this point in my life, and it bothered me, not only because I practiced my ass off to fool them, but I didn't want them to think I was summoning demons. So I would show them how the trick was done. And I kid you not, they would look at me and say, that's not what you did the first time.
Yep.
Because now it's a way of them protecting their commitment to this idea that I have supernatural powers. When I was in Australia, I was talking to a street preacher, and I had just finished a magic show there and was getting ready to do some atheist and skeptic stuff. And he was intrigued by that, so he started asking me questions. You know, these magicians I see on TV, are they really doing magic, or is it just all tricks? And I said, well, I don't know. I suspect that it's all tricks because I can duplicate, you know, this other stuff, and I know how it's done, and it appears to be done the same way. And as James Randi has pointed out, if they are using supernatural powers, they're doing it the hard way. And real magic is fake, and fake magic is real, and all the de facto lines that ended up in the show. But he's like, well, what about when they levitate? And so I walked a few feet away, and I did a quick levitation. And I turned around, and his jaw is just wide open. And I pulled him to the side, and I did it again where he could see from a different angle. And when I turned around, his face was all just, I mean, he was just sunk. And I was like, don't feel that way, because you're sad because the magic was taken away. And what you should be is happy, because a minute ago, you were fooled into believing something is not true, and now you have more information, and you don't have to fall prey to that again.
Right.
Now, when I'm doing the Magic and Skepticism show, I don't really teach tricks, and I don't expose how they're done. I just do it and talk about it. And there's a couple reasons that I don't. One is that there's probably people in the audience who don't want to know how they're done.
Right.
The other is that if I tell you how I did it, I run the risk of you thinking you know how it's done. And that is dangerous, because there are many different ways to accomplish things. And you can end up kind of half smart, where now you think because you know a secret, that means you know the secret, and now you can't be fooled, which basically primes you to be fooled by somebody else. So this thing that's been with me my entire life, this obsession with magic, has turned into a really good tool to teach skepticism, to challenge people's claims about supernatural agency and stuff. And I hope to keep doing that in addition to everything else for as long as I can.
Sure. But you wouldn't say, like I was saying, that it actually helped you get to a skeptical place, that aided in your exit from religion, or it did?
It should have, and I wish it had, but the truth is, I was a huge fan of James Randi and Penn and Teller long before I ever gave up my religion, because religions are really good about creating protective mechanisms. And so I was skeptical about psychics and Bigfoot and UFOs, but I wasn't skeptical about whether or not, Jesus was divine and performed miracles. When everybody around you believes the same thing and you're kind of in this bubble of reinforcement, it's very difficult to say, oh yes, this is something that should be challenged as well. And so while I was skeptical, I wasn't a very good skeptic, because I hadn't yet realized that it should apply to everything, and not just the supernatural, the mundane as well. When I finished the April tour and got back home, I was getting ready to go out for the May tour, and Harry Anderson died. And despite the religious movies he did late in life, I've always been a Harry Anderson fan. So I removed one of the tricks in the show that dealt with the supernatural, and I put in Harry Anderson's 3-card prints and did to talk about how skepticism should apply to the mundane for the 3-card Monty or whatever else. Because somebody's trying to make you believe something that's not true for their benefit, and you should be aware of that.
Good, yeah. So I could talk, as you know, I could talk about just the magic stuff for hours, but I want to stay on this deconversion idea. And so another thing I noticed that I get myself is how much I wanted to live in sin. And what a lot of people I don't think realize on the theistic side about atheists is many of us become atheists in the process of either trying to prove the religion to ourselves or during a faith-building exercise, a long-term one. So I'm curious if that had anything to do. And if you want, just take this time to give us a little more information about your actual deconversion.
Yeah, for me, when I was growing up, the people in the church, my family, thought that God wanted me to be a preacher. And actually, somebody from my former church showed up at one of my debates and mentioned this during the Q&A type thing. So it's not just me saying it. 30 years later, they're still saying it. But I was terrified of public speaking. I didn't want to be a preacher. So I went off and I joined the Navy. And eventually I ended up working in tech industry, and I kind of got screwed out of my job for being too good at it. I managed to get stuff accomplished quicker to the point where they didn't have work for me to do. And they're like, hey, we're sorry to do this, but we got to let you go. And I was mad. And then when I tried to figure out why did this happen, how is it that I had a really good work ethic and worked my tail off, and I ended up losing a job, I came to the conclusion that God was punishing me for not becoming a preacher. And so I gave up, and I said, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. And I spent about 1.5 years in pretty serious prayer and study. I mean, they gave me severance pay so that I didn't have to work for quite a while. And I just I reread the Bible again. I talked to, my uncle was a medical missionary, and I talked to him about stuff and found my way out. I joke that, at some point I realized I couldn't really believe Christianity, and so I tried to explore other religions, and I started with Buddhism to figure out whether or not I would have the multiple lifetimes required to actually study this, because the subject's too big. You can't become an expert on all these religions. And instead, I went down the philosophy route of saying, okay, what kind of God could possibly exist? What in the abstract, what could we say about a God? Because that might direct my search towards which of these religions are right. And then, of course, I realized that they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. It's at least hypothetically possible that they are all wrong. That this is a failure of human beings trying to explain a world that they don't understand and provide comfort and direction when they don't have good answers.
Yeah. So your first story reminded me of I got a message years back right after I became atheist, and it was a guy who had been the young men's president where I lived in Louisiana. So this is when I was about 12 or 13. And he messages me immediately, and he's not asking why I don't believe in God anymore. He's asking these personal, what happened to the kid I knew with all the aspirations, who was going to be somebody, who was going to do something? And I was like, what a weird jump you made. And my response was like, still that guy. And but for the second part, go ahead.
There were two things. So the guy who showed up at the debate to ask the question said, hey, you may not remember me, but I knew you when you were 17, and we were expecting great things from you. Yeah. What happened? And I wanted to say, I went on to great things, but I realized that's not the best answer to give in a Baptist church to the people who are calling you out. Yeah. And there was a friend of mine, one of my best friends. He was actually at my wedding. We're still friends. Unfortunately, we don't get to see each other very often. We were in the same youth group at church. We both were convinced that God wanted us to be preachers, and he went on to become a youth minister. And then he married one of the girls in his youth group. And that didn't go over so well for the youth pastor to be marrying this girl that he had kind of tutored up to be legal age. But he, it just happens. You don't have any control over who you fall in love with.
That's the story of my mom and dad. my dad was my mom's seminary teacher.
Yeah, there wasn't anything nefarious about it, and I wouldn't speak disparaging him. But their marriage didn't last, and he ended up marrying a woman who was Catholic, and then he became a Catholic. And he came to me one time, after I'd come out as an atheist, and he said something along the lines of, I just don't get it. I mean, we grew up together, we learned the same stuff. I don't know how you could just become an atheist. And I was like, I don't know how you could become a Catholic. And he looked at me and he goes, well, I like to drink and they let me drink. And I was like, okay, now I know everything that needs to go into this conversation. I'm an atheist because I took it seriously, and you're a Catholic because you didn't.
Yeah. Where did you come up with, and it's probably the line of yours that I most often repeat, and I do try to give you credit when I do in my videos, but it's the you've made the statement. It's along the lines of, I want to believe as many true things as possible, but also dismiss as many untrue things as possible, or reject as many untrue things as possible.
I want to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. What was the origin of? Is that something you came up with, or is that sourced from somewhere? Where's that?
I said it off the cuff. So I have no expertise in anything. I don't have any degrees. I'm self-taught. But if I have an expertise in something, it is taking difficult concepts and distilling them to the point where anybody can understand them. And I joke in part because that's what I had to do for me to get it. But if I'm on this show and I come out, I don't want to just quote, Hume, the wise man apportions his belief to the evidence. Or if someone were to suggest that a man rose from the dead, I must ask whether it's more likely that they are deceived or deceiving than that the thing be true, because that just doesn't resonate. Mm-hmm. But for me, what skepticism is I want my internal model of reality to match reality as best as it can.
Right.
And to crib Hume's epistemology was to say, I think it just came out on the show one day, and I liked it, and other people liked it, so I kept using it, which is, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And I would go on to explain why you need both of those.
Right.
Because if you want to believe as many true things as possible, you believe everything.
Everything, yep.
And if you want to believe as few false things, you believe nothing.
Right.
You have to have both sides of that, and what that essentially means is, I want my internal model of reality to be as accurate to the reality I experience as possible.
Good, yeah. Yeah, and we're getting off track. I'll get back to the questions I've written, but I actually was using this argument when debating an apologist the other day, and we're actually going to re-record a debate with a new proposition because it got so off the rails. But I had talked about that, and he asked for definitions, and I think I gave adequate ones, but I want to give you the same questions, and you'll recognize the apologetic tone of the question. Well, what is truth? Or, well, what is, what was the other word? We'll just go with, well, what is truth then?
Yeah, that's a common starting point because it's a real issue. Mm-hmm. First of all, you should always try to define your terms. And second of all, there is a problem of whether or not we have adequate access to truth. And, science doesn't make proclamations about truth.
Right.
It just offers up probabilistic explanations that are tentative and based on the evidence. Mm-hmm. But it's true in some sense. And for me, I define truth as that which comports to reality. And so it's true if it's real.
That was his follow-up, which was, that was the other word I was trying to think of that he asked, which was, well, then what is reality? Again, apologists, no surprises.
Yeah, and this is trying to go down a hole because I experience some reality, and as presuppositionalists and their clones like Sciaton Bruggencate and stuff will try to do is they'll say, well, you are taking it on faith that the reality you experience is in fact the accurate ultimate reality, and that's not true. I experience whatever reality I experience. I can't control that. And I'm not assuming that it's a true or ultimate reality. I just have no other option. It's a pragmatic thing that I have to deal with the reality I experience. I can't prove that you're real. I could be a brain in a vat being fed this, and Jimmy doesn't exist, and it's all in my head. But if I live my life as if the stuff that I'm experiencing is not real, I'm going to probably die. The rules of this, it's like, how do you know you're not in the Matrix? Well,
right.
I don't know that whether or not I'm in a matrix, but until somebody shows me that I am and that there is some way out, I have to deal with the rules of the matrix as they are.
Right. So let me give you the answer I gave, and you tell me if it's because it felt good in the moment, which means I probably overlooked something and it was terrible. Mine was there are apparently 7 billion other people, and I define reality as those things that exist in the same realm as all 7 billion people and myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably acceptable. There's a load of problems with that, though, because some of those 7 billion people are clearly delusional and experiencing, or may not be able to see and experiencing things the same way that you do. But the thing is, we're good enough about understanding the truth about reality that we even are capable of locking people up when their perception of reality is clearly harmful to themselves and others, that they are divorced from our reality. Now, you could make the claim that those people we locked up are actually in tune with the real reality, and all the rest of us are the ones that are deluded. And I can't prove that wrong. It's an unfalsifiable proposition. But you can't operate based on that assumption. You have to operate that, if I say, look, this is a Talk Heathen coffee mug, the overwhelming majority of everybody, even if they don't speak English, once they've been explained the concept that I'm expressing, would agree. And there's a quote that I kind of like, which is, reality is those things that don't go away when you stop believing in them. Right.
Which is, I think that's the path I would have gone down if he had brought up, well, what about the people who wouldn't agree that that's a Talk Heathen mug? And it would be, it's those things that it's a Talk Heathen mug whether or not they believe, as far as
it's a problem. When they raise these problems, the problem of hard solipsism, or the grounding of reason itself, they don't have a solution either. The problem is real. It's something that we have to deal with, but they're basically saying, oh, your worldview doesn't include a solution for that, but my worldview does. And in fact, their worldview doesn't. It just asserts that God is the grounding for reason, or God is the grounding for reality. But they also have to recognize that if they're calling into question the reliability of my experience, they have to also call into question of the reliability of their experience. And if their experience includes this explanation, it is now suspect as well.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, I was tempted to now ask you if you believe in a deterministic universe or not, but there's no way. That would be too derailed, so
no,
Google
it's easy.
it. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I believe in a largely deterministic universe, but not an absolutely deterministic one, because I don't think that could be established.
Yeah, that's a good, my position's probably the same. I think I would at least that's one of those words that I was raised by a British woman, so my tongue wants to say colloquially and colloquially at the same time. Anyway, I was saying I probably have said absolute deterministic represents my own, but
my problem is, we talk about things like quantum indeterminacy, which seems to fly in the face of a purely, basically I'm a soft determinist and not a hard determinist. My thing is, I'm not necessarily convinced that what's being identified as indeterminacy is anything more than a pattern that is just too complex for us to recognize as a pattern.
Exactly the same thing I say when people bring up quantum randomness. I always say the very same. We haven't established that it's random. We just have established that we can't measure the pattern, or we can't determine the pattern by which it operates. So yeah, cool. All right, we'll get back on track here. So the Atheist Experience this last week finally made it to episode 1000, finally, as though that was the goal from the onset, but it's still very cool. I'm curious, you had mentioned it a few episodes ago. Did anybody come up with a number, how many of those 1,000 episodes you've been in?
Yes, actually, somebody walked in with a spreadsheet of a count of how many shows I've done, and how often I had hosted with various people and hosts. It's like there's one episode with Vic Stinger, and then there's another, Tracy and I think Don are the two that I've done the most. And so there's all this stuff in spreadsheets and everything else. I don't remember the exact number. I think it's somewhere between I think it's around 380 something that I had done.
So roughly a third, yeah. I mean, in that area.
It feels like more than that. But the thing is, we got to 1,000 because there are episodes that are lost that we, don't have access to, and so it's a really good line in the sand.
Right.
There were years where I did somewhere between 45 and 50 episodes in a single year. So basically, I was the only host, and I was here almost every week. And, we take a couple weeks off a year. Normal TV show is going to do 18 episodes to 26 episodes a year. Right. And we're on probably 46 to 50 weeks of the year. Right. So, yeah, somebody did the math on all that. And I've done a lot. It feels like a lot. It feels like more. But, I'll do another 300 if people want.
I think they will. Now, is that the hard line? Is 1,300 and then you're done?
No, I have no hard line. I leave the show when the Atheist Community of Austin says, hey, we don't want you on the show anymore, or when my life gets to a point where I no longer think that where the show is the right space for me. If I'm, a lot of this, there's tons of feedback, and I'm constantly trying to do better. Mm-hmm. If I get to a point where I don't think I'm interested in doing better, I'm done. And I don't know when that'll happen.
Sense. And that part's actually coming back here toward the end of the interview. The interview's supposed to get slightly more, I'll use the word intense, as it goes on. So in talking about the 1,000, is there something about the format that prevents, because you said you don't have a hard line, which implies at least that it doesn't burn you out too much? Is there something about, I feel like I've watched you answer the same questions. I've heard you give some of the same arguments 100 different times, I think, by now. Do you ever get burnt out, or is that maybe where some of the impatience comes from when you do get pissed off because it's like, seriously, again, or what's going on there?
Not really. So it's weird because one of my pet peeves I've always said is having to repeat myself. But what I mean by that is if I'm talking to an individual and I've explained myself multiple times, now it's in the pet peeve realm. When I'm doing the show, I try to keep in my mind that for somebody, this is their first time seeing the show. Mm-hmm. And I play a number of games in my head. One of the games is, from the time they start talking, I try to predict where it's going. Because if I can accurately do that, that means that I've got a handle on things. And if they surprise me, now I've learned something new and I get that moment of surprise. Another thing that I try to do is, if I know I've answered a particular or addressed a particular issue in a certain way, or maybe 3 or 4 different ways, I try to find a new way. Because if it turns out that has a different result, either during the call or in a follow-up email or whatever else, now I have a better understanding of what's likely to have an impact on people.
Right.
There are some things, I go to slavery all the time because I think it's both intuitively and emotionally obvious that there's a problem there, and I like to watch the tap dance because there's no way around this. There's no good way to rehabilitate what the Bible has to say about it. But there are other things too, and it's why with the Atheist Debates Project I'm doing videos on women in the Bible and arguments and stuff. But no, I got warned early on that people were afraid, oh, you're doing too much, you're going to burn out. And the truth is, for whatever reason, all I want to do is more. I'm actually considering, I've got this show. For a while I was doing the Atheist Experience and the nonprofits. Now I'm just doing the Atheist Experience. I'm doing it a little less because of traveling. Right. I'm doing lectures, debates, I'm doing the magic show. But I'm also rebuilding the studio that's in my house, and I'm thinking about, and the Atheist Debates videos. I'm also thinking about starting up an additional podcast that is a one-on-one interview discussion. So it'd be like having a caller, but we know who the caller is and what the topic is ahead of time. And we just, can we knock this out in 30 minutes and not do, an hour and a half?
Very cool.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's an obsession or what, but I enjoy doing it. I feel like I never feel like I've done enough, so I keep doing more. And when I get burnt out, I'm done.
I wonder if I take everything and I try to run myself through that same filter, and I wonder if my experience is going to be similar, because one thing that sets me apart from most of the other content creators I've been talking to is apparently everyone is tired of Josh Feuerstein, and I'm sad he went away. So
did he go away?
He's still got the Facebook page, and I'm going to be doing a video, what's Josh Feuerstein up to, but he mostly just shares silly Republican memes that are on the extreme side. I'm not saying Republicanism is silly, because this is for a nonprofit, and I couldn't say that, but his content represents the far alt-right kind of thinking, and he's not. So my character, Mr. Atheist, and my show, Dear Mr. Atheist, is because he started his evolution video with, Dear Mr. Atheist, first of all, let me correct you, because evolution was not a science and never has been. Why? It was never observed. So he is very much the inspiration for the character and show, Dear Mr. Atheist.
So I haven't followed his stuff too much. I have to acknowledge that I am probably an oddity. I've been hosting this show for 14 years, and in that time, there are lots of other atheist shows that have both come and gone. Mm-hmm. There are people who have come in the movement and been just on fire and excited and then fizzle out. Right. There are also apologists that have appeared and disappeared throughout the time I've been on the show. But there seems to be a never-ending supply of them. So I will continue. Yeah,
absolutely. If you could, so let's set up this. Before calling the atheist experience, you should X, and you're speaking to a theist, and you're trying to give them clear, quick, and concise instructions. Before calling the atheist experience, you should.
Before calling the atheist experience, you should ask God what he wants you to say.
Interesting. Not at all the direction I thought you would say. Interesting.
Where did you think I was going to go?
I thought it would go in the direction of maybe go watch a video or two, because I've probably already addressed your question, or...
No. And this is something I've mentioned a few times on the show, and I actually, this past weekend with the caller, I think it was Barbara, who said that God talks to her. Anytime somebody tells me that God actually communicates with them and gives them clear messages, my response to them is, ask God what he wants you to tell me. Because if there's a God and he has a message for me and he wants you to deliver it, God should be able to give you the perfect message that will immediately convince me. And when that doesn't happen, now you're in a really difficult position, because you gave me the message that you think God gave you. So is it your failing? Did you not adequately portray the message? Or is God just not wise enough to know what you should tell me?
Was it you who, I think it might have been, do you know who likened this onto alien abductions, and was like, have you ever noticed that whenever a person is abducted by aliens, they don't come back and prove some theorem? It's always that the aliens wanted to tell humans to love each other. It's nothing new or profound.
I don't think I've said that. I've used aliens as examples. I don't think I've said that specifically, but I've done that. We did it Sunday on the show with regard to speaking to the loved ones, or with the loved ones who've passed on. Mm-hmm. They never say, here's where I hid the will or where I buried the family fortune. It's always, I love you and everything's nice over on this side and I can't wait for us to be together.
Right. Things you could have deduced yourself or made up yourself, if they actually were alive.
And by the way, that statement's probably not original to me. I'm very cautious. I don't claim too many things as being original to me. Maybe nothing.
You know what? That is original. I think, or not original too, but I've heard James Randi repeat the sentiment. Maybe not.
Yeah, and that probably came directly from Randi. It's one of those things where if I don't remember where I heard something, or if I heard something, I don't remember it accurately enough to quote it verbatim and credit it, and I end up paraphrasing, and so maybe the paraphrases are me. But I try to correct it when I can, and one of the ones that happened quite a lot, I love Dan Barker, and Dan does great work with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and in one of his books, he said he presented this idea that perfect justice and mercy were necessarily in conflict, because justice is getting what you deserve, and mercy is a suspension of justice to alleviate you or to keep you from getting what you deserve. So one couldn't be perfectly just and perfectly merciful, or merciful at all. He presented that idea, and I ran with it and did a couple things on the show. And the next thing you know, I see one of those internet memes with a quote about justice and mercy and my name at the bottom.
Yeah.
I've immediately got to say that came directly from Dan Barker, and Dan may tell you that he got it from somebody else. So
Right.
what I tended to say was, if you've ever heard me say anything that you find useful, feel free to use it. You probably won't have any need to credit me, because it's probably not original to me in one form or another.
Just don't be a YouTube creator who repackages his videos almost exactly line for line, and I'll just leave it at that.
Don't take my discussion on morality and create your own video and go point by point in the same order with the same points, like Jacqueline Glenn did.
I wasn't going to drop the name, but I'm glad you did. Yeah.
She flat out said, when she got called out for her plagiarism, she flat out said, I'm hot and my fans don't care and I'm not doing a term paper. Instead of just saying, oh, I screwed up and I apologize. She doesn't, I'm not convinced she has an original thought in her head, and she's a 9/11 truther, so I'm not going to feel bad about it. Plus, you can edit all this out.
Do I have to?
It depends on what kind of pissing contest you want to get into, but yeah, I don't care.
Yeah. I would take anything out on the request of you or Mark, but no, I'm liking it all so far.
I don't hate her or anything else. We were actually going to work together in a video, and that's when the whole plagiarism thing came down, where she was plagiarizing me and I think Seth and some other people, and then she would go on her Facebook and ask them, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then use the comments and not acknowledge that they were comments. It's like it came out of her. So I'm not convinced I've ever heard her say anything that comes directly out of her own head. And I have is she even involved in the community or making videos on religion or atheism or anything anymore?
She's kind of like, sort of like Armored Skeptic, who's become polarizing, and you either used to love him and now you don't care or you don't want to watch his stuff, or he has his now new crowd of people who watch him. And I think she's kind of become that. She still has a crowd, but I don't think it was her old crowd.
I don't know either way, because I don't pay that much attention to YouTubers and YouTube videos. If I'm watching YouTube, it's probably got nothing to do with atheism and nothing to do with philosophy, because that's my downtime. It's how I don't get burnt out.
That was precisely me until I started my channel in February, and I seriously watch everything on double speed because I'm working now with all these other people, and it's not something I would have done otherwise. Now, I have always watched Talk Heathen and the Atheist Experience. Those were Sunday joys, because it's fun to have a Sunday ritual. Someone will take that out of context. All right, so actually, though,
but to be fair, I wasn't all that bothered by Jacqueline, other than her refusal to acknowledge and apologize and move on. She, because hey, if I've said it, you can use it. I'm far more bothered by a collection of individuals who, I don't care that much about copyright, but if I go to all the trouble to put up a video and you basically clone my channel and take all of my content, put it on your channel, there were people who, when I called them out on this and said, hey, please, you need to take that down or I'm going to have to flag your channel, and I don't want to do that. They're like, what? I'm helping you out. I'm getting you more exposure. Yeah, no, you're actually not. I'm closing in on 100,000 subscribers. Your channel with 8 subscribers is not actually benefiting me. I don't care too much if it's not monetized, but as soon as somebody's, I'm trying to not lose my house here as well.
Absolutely. I'm a digital artist for a living, and so I hear the word exposure literally a few times a week. So my new response is, yeah, this is the Oregon Trail, and I'm dying of exposure.
Yeah.
It gets. But while we're in the talking about YouTubers, not so much the people who are just trying to do those clip things, which I agree. That's don't try and monetize other people's content. Don't try and take credit for it. But when we're talking about YouTubers or media personalities in general, even the news, you have new trends now like flat earthism. I don't know if that's the official term for it, anti-vax, that have become popular. And it seems to me they became popular, at least in part, by atheist channels, especially with Flat Earth, at first as a joke, bringing them onto their channel and exposing them. Do you think that there is any responsibility on the side of people who are making that content and basically creating a platform and getting this out to people? Do you think that that exposure is what has led to the popularity of those movements?
Are you saying that people pointing out how the flat earth stuff is nonsense are contributing to the spread of it?
I wouldn't say that now, but my question is more like 2 years ago when nobody was a flat earther and they were found obscure, they were an obscure few people, and atheist content creators who were a little bit larger took them and exposed them to the population for the first time. Would you say there is any, or is it just a nope, all information is fair game, or do you think there's any responsibility?
I certainly lean towards the side that all information is fair game. That
Sure.
If you're telling the truth and you're being critical, I mean, if it was just, I remember one time on the show I said nobody believes in the ancient Greek gods anymore, and I immediately got an email from somebody who was, and I have to kind of assume that they were serious, saying no, I actually do, and I'm not alone. There are others. And then I've probably done the same thing with flat earthers, and now we're getting this backlash. So I have a problem with, I used to love The Onion.
Yeah.
And now I don't. And I don't love any of the satire sites, even though some of them are getting a little bit better about clearly identifying as satire, because we should realize now that we live in a world where there's a sizable chunk of the population that don't have critical thinking skills, that don't understand skepticism, who are credulous and gullible, and they're going to buy into this. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be allowed to say it. You should be allowed to do whatever you want.
Right.
It's just, I think that knowing that's the case, it's not just enough to say it wasn't my intent to actually deceive people, and I certainly can't be faulted if some gullible people were deceived. There's an aspect of that that's kind of frustrating.
Right.
And even this week, there was a woman who sent me a message on Facebook, and you'll laugh at this because there are a number of videos up on YouTube that take magicians and claim that they are actually using demonic powers, and they'll show the trick. Now, I don't know if the people who originally produced these actually believe that this is demonic power. It wouldn't surprise me either way at this point.
Right.
But now I have people, this woman sends me this link to a video, and it's clips of Jabrizi and somebody else, and they're saying, oh, this is so impossible, it could only be achieved through demonic powers. And she sent it to me and she says, certainly you have to understand that there can't be any explanation for this other than supernatural powers and demonic powers. And I just sent back a one-line thing that said, you're joking, right? And she got mad and replied, no, I'm not joking, Mr. Know-It-All, I can replicate all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then she blocked me before I could even reply. Now, that's all her prerogative. But the thing is, it takes me back to the story I talked about earlier in Australia. The trick they showed, or one of the tricks they showed, is something that if she was sitting in this room, I could show her how it's done.
Yep.
I already know that isn't necessarily the most helpful way to disabuse her of this notion. But when she shut it all down before there was any opportunity to explain, that kind of gave me a strong hint that she's not interested in the truth.
Right.
She's interested in protecting her beliefs. And it's one of the reasons why on the show I'm constantly talking to people about whether or not they actually care about what's true, or if they care more about what's comforting or not being challenged.
Right. I think maybe a better way to rephrase what I was asking, not that you didn't answer, you answered part of it, but Richard Dawkins traditionally has said, don't debate creationists. That looks good for their resume. It doesn't look good for yours. And I don't know if he talked about exposing those ideas to more people, but Flat Earth, for example. Now I plan on I've already done a video on a Flat Earth Facebook group just because I find their memes so funny. And if I have an expertise, it's photography, and they seem to put a lot of confidence in these photography-based arguments that are complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. So is it would you say a person who doesn't take that advice from Richard Dawkins and says, come on and I'll give you equal access to this platform? Because I wouldn't consider the atheist experience that, because first of all, you can hang up on them, but it's also shorter things. Is there any responsibility there? Can it be irresponsible to accept debating or sharing a platform with a bad idea?
So I would say not irresponsible in and of itself, but there's certainly ways to do it that could be irresponsible. I disagree with Richard to some extent. I don't think Richard should be debating creationists because I think that does elevate them.
Sure.
I don't think he should be debating biological evolution versus creationism, because that does kind of put them on the same footing, which isn't deserved. Right. That doesn't mean I don't agree with the notion that you shouldn't debate these issues. I'm happy for Aaron to debate them. I'm happy for me to debate them. I'm not a scientist, because I think that you have entirely too many people who already believe this to just ignore it and pretend it will go away.
Yeah.
And the alternatives are either you have some debate or you discuss it without them there. And if you discuss it without them there, you run the risk of creating straw men.
Right.
I think there's exceptions. For example, I can have a debate about, what human rights we should have, et cetera. I don't ever have to speak with anyone from the KKK. I don't have to debate David Duke on human equality. I can fairly represent his views and show why I don't agree with him without giving him a stage to do so. There's nothing intellectually dishonest about me doing that. That said, if the majority of the population started agreeing with the KKK.
That was my next question, actually. Yeah.
Then I think that there may be a moral responsibility to publicly challenge them in as fair of a setting as possible, just so that you don't give them the ammunition of, oh, well, of course it's easy for you to talk about me when I'm not there, but you can't. You're afraid to get on stage with me and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you have to do it in such a way that it elevates their ideas to be on par with opposition from the start.
I think that my views line up similar. So, for example, I have right now this little asshole of a preacher who I'm not going to say his name on here because I am opposed to giving him more platform, but famously he's been in the news recently for suggesting homosexuals should be killed by the government, and he is now in the comments on videos of mine trying to provoke his way into an invitation on my channel. And I've said straight out, I might make fun of you in some of my videos, but you won't be live talking to me on my channel ever.
Yeah, if you've got the bigger signal and they're desperately trying to get there, it's probably a strategic mistake to help them out by giving them that platform.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I did the event with Jordan Peterson. People are like, why did you platform that guy? And I was like, first of all, he's more popular than me. I'm not the one doing the platforming. And I'm not doing any no platforming either. But I think there's value in the conversation. And anytime you get somebody whose ideas are this popular, I think it's worth addressing.
Absolutely.
But there are strategic concerns about how to do it right. We used to talk a lot about Westboro Baptist Church. But mostly we'd talk about them when they were in the news, because at that point they're being covered in the national news and we're not.
Right. So I'm going to bring back something that may not be a happy memory. I don't know how you felt about it, but you had a debate in 2014 with David Robertson. I don't want to talk that much about the debate, but he did write about the atheist experience, and he described the atheist experience as a show in which you fulfill what he calls a mandate from Richard Dawkins to mock Christians. So I just wanted your response to that assertion.
I don't know that I'd ever heard that. I'm pretty sure that David's a guy who had to write some sort of apology post for why he was so mean and terrible to me during the debate, if I'm remembering the right person.
It probably is him, but in this article, he also excuses that away, and that's actually so I'll give you the next question too, just so that, and you can just do it all together. So later in the article, he's lobbying complaints against the atheist audience who was critical of not what he said, but the ways he said it, which I thought was almost situational irony, because I see people in the comments, well, not on the atheist experience, but people talking about the atheist experience saying the same thing toward you. So it's not as though that's an atheist or a theist thing. Both sides don't like the way they say it.
It's extra amusing because it wasn't just atheists that were upset with the way he said things. It was Christians who were upset with the way he said things too. So he had to kind of write a defense of why he took the tact he did. I'm not overly concerned about people's opinions on tone. I consider it. I always try to do the right thing. I screw up. I've been mean to people unnecessarily. I've been short-fused unnecessarily, and I try to do better. And if somebody thinks that I've done something wrong, I will consider that, evaluate it. Just the other day, somebody said, "Oh, you keep, getting after the callers for interrupting you while you're speaking, but you interrupt them while they're speaking." As if I didn't know I did that. Yeah. I absolutely know that I do that, and I do it for reasons I've described before. Number one, if they're using terms that we haven't defined, I want to interrupt to get clarity. Number two, if they're not answering the question that was asked and it doesn't look like they're getting anywhere near it, I'm going to interrupt that because this isn't a show for them to call in and give a sermon.
Exactly. Yep.
If they don't acknowledge points and instead just move on to the next thing, now we're in a gish gallop. And I've had calls in the past where they would say something, I would jot down the note of what they said, they keep going for several minutes, and then I say, back at the beginning, you said this. And then they'll say, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. And now they get another 5 minutes to derail again.
Right.
At the end of the day, this is our show, the Atheist Experience is our show, and I have a duty to make sure that things progress and that callers aren't wasting time, because there's other callers waiting. Right. Now, with regard to David Robertson saying that I'm operating on a mandate from Richard Dawkins, that's just nuts.
Yeah.
I've done events with Richard. We are friendly. We're not friends. It's not like we have each other's cell phone number or anything. We've done a bunch of events. We get along. I've also called Richard out when he's said things that I disagree with or that I thought were incredibly problematic. I think, and some of them he's apologized. He and I had an argument at lunch one time because I was going to do a debate on abortion, and we had completely different approaches. Now, it was a friendly little disagreement,
right?
But I think he was monumentally wrong, and I told him so. But at the end of the day, Richard Dawkins, as much as I get along with him and admire him in many ways, can't tell me to do shit. And
right.
I'm not under a mandate from anybody but me. And even the Atheist Community of Austin it is never going to tell me what I can and can't say. They can say, you're going to do it our way, you leave the show, in which case I leave the show.
Yeah, exactly.
The same thing's true on Patreon. My patrons who are contributing to the videos that I'm producing, they can say, I'd like for you to do a video on this, or could you address this, or this topic, or anything else. But if they ever come and say, don't say that again, or I'm not going to keep donating, I'm going to say, stop donating right now, because I'm going to say it again. Yeah. But it's a defense mechanism, because if David comes in and views something where he cannot actually counter and offer a reasonable response to why I don't believe in God or why I have objections to the Bible or the Bible's position on slavery, it is very easy, if he only has to talk to believers, to just suggest that we're not being intellectually honest or rigorous, and instead we are following this Pope, because everybody that he's talking to are already in a mindset of following a leader. They're following the Pope, they're following Jesus, they're following their pastor. They have this top-down authoritarian view of how the world proceeds, and we don't fit in that box. So it's very beneficial for him to try to put us in that box.
Right. And to be clear, because I don't want anyone to accuse me, as they definitely will, you didn't provide enough context. He wasn't necessarily saying that Richard directly said it to you. It was that Richard said this at a Reason rally about ridicule and mocking Christians, and that you had taken that as a mandate, essentially. And actually, so I made a post today, and the post was simply that ridicule and satire are valid forms of criticism. You didn't click like on it. No, I'm curious if you think that is the case, like I do.
I'm absolutely a fan of ridicule and satire, despite what I said about The Onion and other satirical sources. When it's done right. And I think I've said many times that ridiculous ideas are by definition deserving of ridicule, but that people are not. I try, and I've failed, but I try to make sure that I'm not ridiculing people. I'm ridiculing ideas and claims. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate reality is that those ideas are so foundational to who the person is that you can't avoid them being offended by it anyway, and for them taking it personally.
I think I do think situationally, and I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm just showing where I maybe disagree. Situationally, I do think there are people who you absolutely should ridicule them as soon as they, in a way, we don't disagree far, but as soon as they basically are the representative of that bad idea, then I think it's fine to do.
And I've done it, and I'm fine with it. Kind of take the wind out of these windbags. But I also, whether I'm ridiculing the person or the belief, and I try to do the latter and not the former, I also don't ever begin with ridicule as the first path.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I even explained with somebody who asked, because they said it's not constructive. I explained that specifically when you have ideas or people that are spewing bad things like flat earth, anti-vax, that have all the refutation in the world that has been presented to them and they're still sticking to their guns, at that point there's sometimes nothing left to do but ridicule.
There's also a difference here. When I'm doing the TV show, when I'm doing a debate, I don't think I'm going to convince my debate opponent, although I'm always going to present the things that I think should convince them. I'm doing it on behalf of the audience.
Right.
And like the beginning, the very first trick in my Magic and Skepticism show, it has Ray Comfort speaking over the trick that I'm doing. There's no way to deny that I'm in some ways mocking Ray, even though I'm focused on his ideas. And as soon as he's done speaking, I point out that I'm not doing this to make fun of Ray. I'm pointing out that what Ray's saying isn't skepticism, and this is how it led to this. But it's a funny bit. And I hope that Ray gets to see it someday, because he's a nice enough guy that I think he'll largely appreciate it.
The smartest thing he ever did was embrace the Banana Man thing, because it made it less funny.
Well, the bit is the banana bit, but I'll tell you about it another time.
Good. Yeah. Well, and hopefully I'll be able to come see it here soon. Yeah. So we're talking about the various delivery methods a bit. That's the question I want to go into now. We're getting close to the end of the main interview. But you were right. 1 hour was foolish to think I could pull off. But so you have, with atheism, as far as atheist communicators, you have people on the one end that have that very empathetic approach, like Anthony Magnabosco, very soft. Then you have on the other end what would probably be Aaron Ra, Late Hitchens. They skip all of the foreplay, if you will. Do you see anywhere, and I'd love to know where you place yourself, but do you see anywhere on those ends or in the middle where I'd maybe put Sam Harris with his lullaby voice as more useful than the others, or do you think that it is a scenario of all of these are useful to different kinds of people, so we need all of them, or would there be methods of communication you are seeing become sort of common and popular that you would suggest we stop doing?
Yeah, this is the same old, do we need diplomats or firebrands? And my answer hasn't changed. You need them both. Yep. You need whatever approach is going to be most effective. There are kids who stop believing in Santa Claus because they investigate on their own and find the presents, or somebody just tells them and they accept it and it makes sense. And then there's other kids that don't give it up until they are mocked on the bus for, oh, you still believe that childish thing. So I think there's a place for it. I don't think that mockery necessarily should ever be the starting point. Right. So you've got, I love Anthony. Anthony's a good friend of mine. And
absolutely.
Certainly he's out on the friendly side.
Yeah.
There are others that are out, more in the firebrandy type. I have been both and can be either at different times. I tend to float somewhere in the middle. When the call starts, I am always optimistic that it's going to be a good call and we're going to reach something that's going to be beneficial to somebody. Mm-hmm. And then when it doesn't quite go that way, when the person I'm talking to is engaging dishonestly, I have pretty much zero tolerance for bullshit, and I will call it out. And I will, flat out, I will hang up on people. I will point out when they're not being accurate or honest. I will, probably some of the most popular videos that people have clipped out of the Atheist Experience are me going on an epic rant on some topic.
Yeah.
None of those are planned or written out. It's somebody said something, and by God, I'm going after it. And I worry sometimes that people will come across those clips. They'll be the only thing that they see, and they will develop an opinion of who I am. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, you could put together an hour-long video of me looking like a monster and another hour-long video of me looking like someone with the patience of a saint and compassionate and empathetic, and make me look however you want. Yeah. Long ago, I gave up any hope of ever running for office or ever being understood fairly, because people are only going to know me from the clips.
Right.
And what I like is the people who have seen, that come up and like say, I've seen every episode of the Atheist Experience. They have the most accurate view of who I am. And if I'm at a convention or a show and they come up and talk to me, they're the ones who seem to know me best, because there's no pretense. What you see is what you get. You come over here and hang out at the building, I'm the same here.
Yeah.
I am different at different times. If I'm in a formal structured debate where there's rules, that's different from handling a call on the show.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I want as many approaches as are effective and useful to helping improve the world.
Recent statistics about the growing levels of non-belief and the people who mark no religion, I know have made a lot of atheists very optimistic. However, I also see growing trends of pseudo-spirituality, pseudo-scientific representatives like Deepak Chopra seducing more and more minds, especially in the atheist community. So do you think that we should be worried that those shrinking numbers are just the part of that fad culture who don't want to be labeled, and should we be claiming as much victory as, I'm not sure that you do that at all, but you see it a lot in the atheist community of, we're clearly winning, and I don't know if I think that's the case, so I wanted your thoughts on it.
Well, I think there's a context in which we are clearly winning, where those people, if the focus is helping people give up religious beliefs, that doesn't mean that we have created skeptics. It doesn't mean that we've created humanists. I think that is where the next phase of the work is, which is why I've focused on the Magic and Skepticism lecture and show, and doing more and more pro-humanism talks and discussions, because atheism is like the first step. And you can be an atheist for really bad reasons. There's nothing about atheism that means you did a thoughtful, intellectual, skeptical evaluation of religion and rejected it.
Right.
And we see that in what you're talking about, with people still falling for all kinds of pseudoscientific stuff. And I think it's because atheism doesn't. It's not a worldview. It doesn't give you the structure. It doesn't give you values. It doesn't teach you about, how to live in a life where there's not this God thing.
Right.
But humanism does.
Right.
And so I'm both optimistic that the current bevy of bad organized religions, Christianity, Islam, and others, are on the decline. I don't necessarily think that means atheism will win or has won, but the trend is that direction.
Okay.
My big concern is kind of what you touched on, which is, if you look at just Christianity, the one religion that I know the best, I've said on many occasions that liberal Christians are not ripe targets, because they've already dealt with the problems that you're going to point out related to the religion, and they've come up with some rationalization. They've got a softer, lighter, cafeteria style of their beliefs. And so, they are not as falsifiable, their beliefs are not as falsifiable as the fundamentalist who believes the earth is 6,000 years old and that, there was a literal Adam and Eve. And I gave a talk in California saying that, fundamentalists are the target audience. That's where you're going to have the most impact. What I worry about is that, in the same way that there can be shifts from a liberal Christian to a fundamentalist one, there can be shifts the other way. And if all we're doing is shifting people to more liberal, unfalsifiable versions of Christianity, that may be an improvement, but it's not enough. And if we've shifted them out and then they buy into pseudoscientific woo-woo stuff like that, that might also be better, but it's still not enough, because the goal should be for a world that is as rational as possible.
So I often make the statement, and forgive me if I'm forgetting that somebody else has too, but I have to make the statement that there is no version of Christianity or whatever religion that is so liberal or so apathetic that it becomes harmless, because at the very least, anybody who claims a religious belief is perpetuating the idea that faith is a reasonable way to start a belief system or a reasonable basis for belief. And so even if you are the most liberal version of a Christian, something you are doing still perpetuates ideas that support the extreme versions. We'll go with Westboro. I won't go all the way to ISIS in this case because people get annoyed.
Sam Harris had said similar things, as had Dawkins, that basically the liberal and moderate believers serve as sort of a shield for the fundamentalists because they're using the same label, Christianity, pointing to the same book, the Bible, and that lends credibility to the fundamentalist wing. I do think that there are liberal Christians, in much the same way that like Reform Jews don't have to believe in a God. Reform Judaism doesn't require that, and I think nearly half of Jews in Israel are secular.
Right.
There may well be, or there may well become, denominations within Christianity that are roughly the same as that, where this is nothing but a cultural exercise, where we look far more like a Unitarian Universalist church, or even a humanist church, or an Oasis, or something like that.
I think Community of Christ does that now. They were formerly the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and now now my understanding is you don't need to accept any of the faith claims of the church to be a member. You can just come and
donate money.
Yeah, exactly. Not that they're doing that great. I don't know if you've heard how the Community of Christ is doing, but
you can't really criticize that because, hey, if you want to be a member of the Atheist Community of Austin, all you have to do is sign up and not believe in God and pay your dues. But you can still come out to the community center, whether you're a member or not, to the Free Thought Library and watch the show and other stuff.
Yep.
So these analogies that people have of, these atheist communities, they're just like churches. No, they're not, because those aspects are the things that make us human. We are social creatures getting together to do stuff, and it costs money to produce shows or supply food to a whole bunch of people who show up.
I also like being told that I have faith too, when I am so incredibly familiar in what the state of having faith is and what it feels like, and am just entirely certain I have shed that state.
And it goes down to, it ties into something I said earlier, but I didn't phrase it this way. It's this idea that we are challenging, let's say, a religion and saying, look, here's something bad about your religion. Mm-hmm. And what they're replying with is, well, you have something bad about your beliefs too. And as soon as they say that, they're admitting you were right.
Right. I brought that up on, you met Genetically Modified Skeptic. He did a video about these faith claims, and I brought up in the comments how important it is for the faithful to assert that atheists have faith too, because they know it is no good for a belief system.
Oh, well, you say that I'm foolish to exercise faith. Well, you do it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. If you can show me where I'm exercising faith in the way that you are, I will stop doing that because I think it's bad. I'm happy that you agree with me that it's bad.
And I'll give you $100 because all I want to know is if I ever do that again, because I'd like to shed it. Yeah. Mark, I think every now and then I'm getting a little feedback. I think the mic might still be active, but you guys in the back, but you guys might be a little distance.
One of the things is the door's open.
Oh, okay. That's probably it.
Oh, the door is open.
That's all good. It was only a couple of little spots, so I can isolate and take care of them.
Yeah, we're a couple of loudmouths back here, too. So.
It's all good. All right, so final question. Is there any particular debate topic or even a particular person that you debated that you can point to as the one that was the most intellectually thrilling for you to engage with, and why that was? This would be off of the atheist experience, not a call.
Yeah, so this one's kind of difficult to actually answer. If somebody had said, hey, who's your favorite debate opponent? That's easy because it's Blake Junta, because I think we've had good discussions both on stage and off stage. And I genuinely like him and we get along.
Cool.
If it was about, which debate did you do that you think you did the best or, were the most proud of, it kind of depends because I liked the way the debate with Cy went, but that's not something for everybody. I also think, even though it wasn't a debate, a proper debate, I thought the discussion with Jordan Peterson worked in the sense that I was able to get him to kind of expose some what I view as flaws in his thinking.
Yeah, it would be difficult for me getting the question back about you because I can't stand him so much, and I'm very open about that.
Yeah.
But that is one of my favorite debates of all time. Now, first of all, no debate from anybody outside of myself is going to be, not that within myself would be. No debate is ever going to top for me when Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens took on those two representatives from the Catholic Church. That is the greatest celebration of human language that I've seen so far.
I think that's way up there on my list from other people. One of my other favorite debates was Sean Carroll versus William Lane Craig, where he had that video of Alan Guth that basically might as well have said, Craig doesn't understand my theories. That embarrassed him.
I appreciated the, what do you call it, humor behind it. That was awesome.
I'm not the best person to ask about my own debates. And one of the things is with the Atheist Debates Project, I'll post my debate and then I dissect it apart and post debate reviews where I point out mistakes I made, mistakes my opponent made, things that could have done better so that everybody benefits from it. I'm always optimistic that the next debate is going to be the really, really best one.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of them and there were a lot that I liked. For lots of different reasons. The debate I did with Abdu Murray, I liked it because it was an unusual topic. Should America be one nation under God? And because it was in Amarillo, Texas, and we had about 700 people there.
Yeah, sure.
I liked the debate that I did in Atlanta against a guy who had never done a debate before, and when it was over, he just acknowledged that he got kicked around, but none of it was mean.
Right.
I like the debate that I did in the high school against a local pastor. I try to make sure that we're getting something out of all of them.
I'm surprised you liked that one. That one would have. Did you like it as much in retrospect? Because that.
I liked it because of the situation.
Okay.
That I was in a high school classroom.
Yeah.
A classroom about teaching debate.
That makes sense. The straw manning and the excuses, the setting up that I've never debated before, and then uses the same dishonest debate tactics.
Yeah. It's because it's what they're trained to do. The apologists aren't debating; they're preaching. They're just trying to disguise it.
Yeah.
It'd been much easier if you just asked me which debate do you think you had the worst performance in, and that would have been one of the debates I did with Cliff Connectley, where I'd been sick for a week and I just kind of sat there boring and read my stuff. And he's a street preacher, so he's animated. And the thing that people forget is that debate is, at least in part, theater, that you have to make a connection with the audience. And I don't think I made any connection that day. As far as the merits of the arguments and stuff, that's the same. And it's rare that I get surprised. JT and I did a team debate with John Ferrer and Sloan Lee. And I can easily say that Sloan may have been the most arrogant person I've been in a room with, although David Robertson was problematic. I'm nowhere near answering your question. Crap.
It's all good, man.
I don't know. You can edit something out of that. Or ask me one more time to see if I have a better answer.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of debates. Which debate was it? And I'll even mend my phrasing from what I wrote. Which debate, in the moment of its conclusion, did you have that adrenaline rush of that debate kicked ass the most?
Yeah, there were probably a couple where I had that kind of feeling. I mean, I'm always my own harshest critic, which is why I go back and review the debates and point out where I made mistakes. As far as debate performance, I had that feeling at the end of the debate with Cy. I had that feeling at the end of the discussion with Jordan Peterson that I was happy about what I had said and done and how it went, even though it wasn't a debate. But there's a few other debates. I really liked the debate that I did with Abdu Murray on whether America should be a Christian nation. And the discussions that I had with Blake Junta, he's one of my favorite debate opponents because we are actually, if not friends, then at least friendly, and we have good conversations. And that's what I want. It's there are people who watch clips of the show or watch the debates and they're like, oh, I want to see you smack down on the theists and beat them up. Rah, rah. That is never how I go into debate. And I don't look at debates in terms of winning or losing. For me, a win is, did I show up and effectively communicate what I wanted to communicate?
To the audience, specifically.
Do I think I reached people in the audience? And it's very rare that doesn't happen.
Right.
Sometimes it happens where, I'm not quite as impressed with myself as other people might think I am, but sometimes I leave the stage feeling like I did good, and those are 2 examples.
Yeah, and I think most people in those situations, if you don't throw up on yourself, those situations are an adrenaline rush. So, now I enjoy the SmackDowns too, but the reason why I liked the Jordan Peterson one so much is now I have been saying forever that the guy uses the same kind of shallow reasoning to make what he thinks are common sense arguments and dress them up with a sexier vocabulary that make it. And sometimes he's right, and there are lots of things I don't disagree with him on. And he presents them in a very articulate way. But the problem is he doesn't diverge from that method. And there were so many atheists who were seduced by him that when you exposed that he uses that same kind of reasoning that doesn't actually make it all the way to being fleshed out in regards to his belief about God, or more specifically, what he perceives atheists to be like. That was an important moment for me because I'm fixated on what a monster. I was seduced by him at first, to tell you the truth. And
there's things that he says that I agree with, that and I've talked about that. The funny thing happened this week. I mean, I know, like, just the other night he did another event with Sam Harris. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what they discussed or how it went because I haven't spoken to them afterwards. When we left the stage, Jordan, seemed to be willing to do another event with me, and then at some point after that, he decided that it very quickly probably wasn't a good idea. But he was polling people to ask for information. What do you want me and Sam to talk about? And somebody asked him to define God. And I'm not going to pull this up, but I'll get this pretty close to word for word. God, he said, okay, I'll define God. God is that in which we manifest necessary faith. And I'm like, that explains a lot. But the problem here is that what he's talking about isn't in any way a good definition of God.
Right.
If anything, he's defining religion in the loosest sense. Almost in this, because he wants this to be everybody has some God, everybody has some metaphorical God. And my response to that is, no, I don't. First of all, I disagree that there is necessary faith. And he goes on to talk about how there has to be some foundation from which to interpret. And I'm like, wow, that's a mistake. It demonstrates you don't understand skepticism. But I don't think that faith is necessary. I don't think there's a necessary faith. I don't think there's some requirement that we have a God, metaphorical or otherwise, or a religion, metaphorical or otherwise. But at a minimum, when he defined God, he is at best defining religion. Because if you walked around and interviewed the billions of people on this planet who believe in a God, that is nowhere near their definition. It is not near the God of classical theism, the omnimax God. It is not near the personal agent that is a part of Christianity or Islam, the 2 biggest religions on the planet.
The great I am.
It's almost like he's never actually met people who believe in a literal God, or doesn't think that there's that many of them, or doesn't think that that's the norm. He's caught up in this abstract, we have some, mythos, some archetype, and this becomes our shrine in our head to praise, and so this is the thing we put faith in, so I'm going to call that God. Well, you might be able to make an argument that that is a form of religion, but I still don't think you can make the argument that everybody has that, certainly not to the extent that he would portray. And so I don't know how the event went with Sam yet, but I'll be interested to see if they touched on that.
Me too. And what's interesting about the tweet you're referring to as well, if I'm remembering it correctly, he starts the tweet by saying fine with a period definitively, and then defines it as though he's about to give a direct answer. And it was the greatest non-answer I've seen all year.
Yeah,
and I see a lot of non-answers.
Yes, I will define this. And then he defines something in such a way that it doesn't fit any normative understanding of God. Probably better fits a loose understanding of what it means to be religious about something, and then acts as if he's provided us with clarity and elucidation. And all it is it's the same old obfuscating stuff. It is Chopra-esque in the sense that I'm going to take this concept and make it fit what I'm saying as best I can, and you end up with something abstract and fungible.
Yep. Very good. All right, well, we'll wrap up there. We traditionally, on all of my shows, when I have a guest on, we do a few things. So first of all, just say where people can find you on YouTube or any other social media thing you want to plug for yourself. And then I always ask my guests to plug one more channel other than their own, which I know I kind of did with you earlier with the book stuff, and it was hard. But if you can come up with a channel, it can be Talk Heathen, or just don't make it your own one.
Sure. If people want to find out more about me, the easiest thing to do is to go to mattdillahunty.com. From there, you can get to my Patreon, my YouTube, my Twitter, my Facebook, whatever you want.
Cool.
You could also just Google my name, and you'll find this stuff. I've been producing content for 14 plus years now, so I'm all over the place.
Yeah, the other Matt Dillahunty from Ohio who owns a farm shop won't be in the top 100 results.
There's another Matt Dillahunty in Austin. And I was unlisted and he wasn't, and he started getting the hate mail for the show.
Oof, that's rough.
Yeah. As far as directing people to other content, all I can tell you is that one of my all-time favorite podcasts is called You Are Not So Smart. And if you just Google You Are Not So Smart podcast, you will find an incredible host covering a broad range of topics. When he talks about the Dunning-Kruger effect, he has Dunning on to talk about it. Yeah. He's had my friend Brian Brushwood on there to talk about skepticism and stuff. And he and I did an interview about how people change minds, which I think is going to be part of his forthcoming book. It's a great podcast. It's not specifically philosophical or religious. It's kind of a mix of a bunch of stuff, and he's awesome.
Very cool. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Keep in mind there will be a couple more segments coming out later in the week, over the next 2 weeks, including the most bizarre caller Matt ever got on the Atheist Experience, and a little short game of Would You Rather. So look forward to those. But in the meantime, as always, remember, stay skeptical, my friends.